I am the president of Iran, standing inside the presidential complex in Tehran as the first reports come in. The supreme leader is dead. Several air defense batteries are destroyed. Two major missile facilities are no longer operational. American and Israeli aircraft have already exited our airspace. The attack was precise, coordinated, months of preparation. They aimed not at symbolic targets, but at command nodes and deterrence infrastructure. Their message is clear: degrade Iran before it can respond effectively. My first responsibility is not retaliation. It is continuity of state. I order immediate relocation of senior command to hardened secondary sites. Communications are shifted to encrypted backup channels. Surviving Revolutionary Guard commanders are brought into a secure briefing within hours. Intelligence assessments are incomplete. We do not yet know the full extent of damage to our ballistic missile inventory. We do not know how many aircraft remain operational. Satellite feeds are delayed. Rumors spread faster than verified data. Inside Tehran, panic is controlled but fragile. The death of the supreme leader creates both grief and a potential power vacuum. If internal factions begin maneuvering now, external enemies will exploit it. I authorize a national broadcast. My message is measured. I confirm the attack. I confirm losses. I state that the state remains intact and operational. I avoid threats in the first address. The population must see stability, not anger. Privately, my advisors divide into camps. Some urge immediate large-scale missile retaliation to re-establish deterrence. Others warn that our air defenses are degraded and a second wave could follow. The window for decision is narrowing. Every hour we wait strengthens the perception that Iran has been neutralized. But every missile we launch may trigger escalation beyond our control. I request one thing from my commanders: an honest assessment of what we can still fight with. Then I prepare to choose. The damage assessment arrives before dawn. We have lost roughly 30% of our fixed missile infrastructure. Several radar systems are offline. However, our mobile launchers remain largely intact. Subterranean facilities in the Central Plateau survived. Our naval assets in the Gulf are dispersed but functional. We are wounded, not incapacitated. I now face the central decision: signal restraint and pursue immediate diplomatic channels, or respond with calibrated force to restore deterrence. If I do nothing militarily, Washington and Tel Aviv will interpret it as weakness. They may continue targeted strikes under the assumption that escalation dominance is theirs. Domestically restraint could fracture internal cohesion. Hardline commanders would question civilian leadership. I reject full-scale retaliation against civilian centers. That would unify the international community against us. Instead, I authorize a limited but visible ballistic missile strike against identified military installations used in the initial attack, specifically regional U.S. bases in the Gulf and select Israeli military facilities. The objective is strategic messaging, not destruction. We aim to demonstrate capability, survivability, and resolve. Target packages are reviewed to minimize civilian casualties. Launch timing is synchronized to complicate interception, but avoid crossing thresholds that could justify all-out war. Before the first launch, I send quiet signals through diplomatic backchannels to Oman, to Qatar, even indirectly to European intermediaries. The message is simple: Iran's response will be proportionate. We are open to de-escalation if attacks cease. At the same time, I order full mobilization of reserve forces. This is not only military preparation, it is psychological stabilization. When citizens see mobilization, they see state control. Volunteers report to recruitment centers. Civil defense networks are activated. Fuel and food reserves are secured. The missiles launch just after sunset. Satellite imagery confirms impacts on multiple military facilities. Interception rates are high, but not absolute. The world watches. Within hours, oil prices spike. Markets react before governments do. That is not accidental. I instruct naval forces to begin visible patrol patterns near the Strait of Hormuz. Not closure yet, but signaling. Retaliation is underway. Now I wait to see how Washington calculates its next move. The response from Washington and Tel Aviv is measured but firm. Additional air and naval assets move into the region within 48 hours. Carrier strike groups reposition. Israeli aircraft increase patrol frequency. Their public statements frame my missile strikes as confirmation of Iranian aggression, not retaliation. I anticipated this narrative. Information warfare is as critical as air superiority. I instruct our diplomatic corps to formally request an emergency session at the United Nations. We present evidence of the initial coordinated strike. We frame our actions as lawful self-defense under international law. The objective is not sympathy. It is division. If the global community fractures in its response, escalation slows. Meanwhile, I must decide whether to expand the conflict asymmetrically. Iran's regional network in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen can apply pressure across multiple fronts. Activating them would stretch American and Israeli resources. It would also regionalize the war instantly. I authorize calibrated activation, not mass offensives but controlled operations against military-linked assets. Rocket harassment near northern Israel. Disruption of logistics corridors in Iraq. Cyber operations targeting energy infrastructure linked to our adversaries. Each action is deniable, incremental, difficult to respond to, with overwhelming force. The logic is simple: complicate their targeting priorities. Force them to defend everywhere at once. However, every proxy action risks pulling neighboring states deeper into the conflict. Iraq's government protests violations of its sovereignty. Gulf states raise air defense alert levels. The United Arab Emirates begins evacuating certain foreign personnel from sensitive facilities. Regional neutrality is eroding. Domestically, mobilization stabilizes morale, but the economy begins to strain. Insurance premiums for shipping in the Gulf rise sharply. International companies suspend operations. The currency weakens under pressure. My economic advisors present a stark projection. If maritime trade through the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, global oil prices could surge dramatically within days. That leverage is powerful. It is also dangerous. Closing the strait would internationalize the conflict immediately. It would invite naval confrontation with multiple powers, not just the United States. I convene the National Security Council again. The war is no longer only about military balance. It is about endurance, ours and theirs. By the end of the second week, the conflict settles into a pattern of sustained pressure. Airstrikes continue, though less intense than the opening wave. Missile exchanges occur intermittently. None decisive, all costly. Casualty reports arrive daily. Soldiers, air defense crews, civilians caught near military infrastructure. I review summaries, not images. Leadership requires distance, but not denial. Each loss tightens political pressure at home. Hardline factions demand escalation. They argue that limited retaliation has failed to restore deterrence. They push for full closure of the Strait of Hormuz and direct strikes deeper into Israeli territory. Their logic is straightforward. If war is inevitable, maximize leverage now. My economic team presents counterarguments. Oil exports are our remaining financial artery. A full blockade would cut global supply, but also eliminate our own revenue overnight. Insurance markets would freeze. Sanctions would intensify. Even neutral countries might align against us to reopen maritime flow. Internationally, emergency sessions at the United Nations grow more urgent. European states quietly propose ceasefire frameworks. Russia and China signal support for de-escalation, but avoid direct military commitment. No major power wants a regional war spiraling into something broader. Intelligence reports indicate American planners are preparing contingency options for deeper strikes against command infrastructure if we escalate further. They are calculating risk the same way we are. I decide against closing the strait for now. Instead, I authorize limited naval exercises and targeted inspections of foreign vessels stopping short of blockade. The message is clear, but reversible. Simultaneously, I instruct our diplomatic channels to explore indirect talks, not surrender, not concession. A structured de-escalation that preserves sovereignty and avoids total collapse. The domestic mood is shifting. Initial unity is giving way to fatigue. Infrastructure damage is visible in several cities. Energy grids are strained. Displacement numbers rise in border regions. War, even controlled war, consumes legitimacy. I understand something now. With clarity, escalation is easy. Control is difficult. And control is the only path that preserves the state beyond this month. In the third week, the calculus changes. Not because either side achieves battlefield dominance, but because cumulative risk becomes intolerable. Oil markets remain volatile. Insurance rates for Gulf shipping reach unsustainable levels. Several Asian and European economies publicly warn of recessionary shock if instability continues. This external pressure reshapes the battlefield more effectively than any missile exchange. Through intermediaries in Oman and Switzerland, preliminary ceasefire parameters begin to circulate. The framework is limited. Immediate halt to direct strikes, mutual stand-down of missile forces, to defensive posture, reopening of secure communication lines to prevent miscalculation. Broader political disputes are deferred. Inside my Security Council, resistance emerges. Some commanders believe we have regained enough deterrence to press further. They argue that accepting a ceasefire now concedes strategic initiative. I ask a different question. What is the objective? Regime survival. Territorial integrity. Restoration of deterrence, sufficient to prevent future decapitation attempts. None of these require indefinite war. Our military assessments show we can sustain operations for months, but at accelerating economic and infrastructural cost. Reconstruction needs are already expanding. Foreign reserves are under strain. Public morale, while resilient, is not limitless. I authorize conditional acceptance of the ceasefire proposal, tied to verifiable cessation of aerial operations against our territory. The announcement is coordinated carefully. We frame it as a responsible decision to prevent regional catastrophe, not as capitulation. When hostilities subside, the region remains tense but quieter. Damaged facilities will take years to rebuild. The Supreme Leader's death leaves a political transition that cannot be rushed. Our deterrence posture must be restructured with mobility and redundancy prioritized. I walk again through the presidential compound in Tehran. The walls are intact, but the illusion of invulnerability is gone. Leadership in war is not about dramatic victory. It is about choosing which risks to accept and which disasters to avoid. I defended the state, but the cost is visible in infrastructure, in trust, in the understanding that the next crisis will come faster than the last. Power is not preserved by force alone. It survives by restraint under pressure.